Hey, welcome to the Higher Ed Storytelling University podcast. I'm your host, John Azoni, and today we've got a little change of pace. I mean, to be completely honest, I'm between podcast guests. We had a couple people reschedule, and so we've got sort of a 1 week gap here in content. And these are the challenges that come with showing up consistently every week or whenever you say you're going to in content creation. It's not easy. But it's important to me. Consistency is really important to me on this show. And so normally I'd write a solo episode, but I've got video deadlines to hit. So I'm sharing with you the episode from when I was a guest on the Enrollify podcast with Zach Busekrus. So your host today is actually Zach. In this episode, we talked about a lot of things. My journey into storytelling through working with the unhoused population in Detroit. We talk about what higher ed gets wrong about storytelling, talk about a bunch of stuff, and we also talk extensively sort of about Love is Blind, the show on Netflix, and how higher ed can take cues from that gem of a show. All right, so off we go.
All right, my friend, we are live, John. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Got my 5 shots of espresso in me, so I'm amped up, ready to go.
5 shots. Is that like hyperbole, or is it actually 5 shots?
No, it's 5. It's an Americano from Starbucks.
Okay.
With an extra shot, so
Wow.
It's 5 shots, and I'm gonna be on my game today.
Well, I'm excited, man. I'm excited. Hey, maybe that's what I need. I have a son at home who's like 9.5 months now, and I feel like the story I've been telling myself is that my coffee is just too weak. But it could be that the coffee is exactly the way that it's always been. I'm just more tired. So I've been drinking a lot more coffee. I need more caffeine with like less liquid. Maybe I need to do the John Azoni and get 5 shots in my coffee each day.
Yeah, or caffeine pills.
Okay.
Those work good.
Okay.
I just went to I don't know, like a family vacation to Iceland, and I'm like, their coffee is so much different than America.
How so?
It just like a regular coffee. I asked the lady, one of the ladies at the coffee place, I was like, what's the difference between everything was like, you can either get regular coffee or you get an Americano. And they're like, the regular coffee is stronger.
Okay.
And it's like nice and foamy and stuff. And I feel like that's the opposite in the States, where if you get like some sort of espresso drink, like an Americano, that's like way stronger. Like regular coffee is just like watered down. Anyway.
Well, fascinating. Well, I'll have to remember that for my my next trip to Iceland. Well, dude, I wanted to really like have this conversation with you because I've seen you pop up all over social media, over at least my feed, in the last few months, and I then found your podcast and I've listened to a couple episodes, but we've never spoken before. We don't know each other at all. But I wanted to chat with you because the whole like framing of your show is about storytelling. And storytelling, I think, is one of those topics that is so overdone in higher ed, really, and quite frankly, overdone on higher ed podcasts as well. Because everyone knows that it's important. Everyone has an understanding, probably just based off of their own experience, that story like moves us, right? Story can change perspectives. Story can, shift emotions very, very quickly. So it's a very powerful like mechanism. But it's also like really, really, really hard to do well. And I think higher ed tries to do it well, but oftentimes we just like really, really fail. So I know that you've been spending a lot of time thinking through, hey, what are like the mechanics? Like, what are the frameworks? What is the true like art of storytelling? And ultimately, how do we apply that to our current marketing objectives as a college or university? How do we use this as a recruitment tool? Whatever your sort of like hope is for communicating your story, how do we do so in a way that is, that works at the end of the day? So I want to have this like broad conversation around what you've learned starting this podcast, right? Which in and of itself sort of is a story. Each episode is a story that you're telling with your guest. Talk to us a little bit about just where this like love for storytelling originated.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So my background's in painting, actually. I went to art school, Studied abstract painting, kind of got into video through just like YouTube had just come out 2005-ish. And I had got my first MacBook and started making like time lapses of me making these big paintings, and kind of like realized that I liked editing videos and stuff like that. And this whole YouTube thing was kicking off. So I graduated college, and then I actually left, or I actually went into a job in homeless outreach,
Huh.
which is like you do when you leave art school. So my buddy and I had been doing kind of a ministry effort here in Detroit, just like meeting people on the street, really just for the sake of knowing them and just kind of meeting where they're at, not really trying to like solve their life's problems. But we got picked up by a big nonprofit in Detroit, started doing homeless outreach kind of more on a corporate level.
Wow.
And that's where I realized really the power of storytelling, because it's a tough job. Like when you go from just hanging out with people, just learning their names, and really not having much of a objective, that's so much different than going into an environment to do that where there's big money involved.
Yeah.
There's like hundreds of thousands of dollars from the various big funders, Roger Penske, all these kind of like that level of business sponsors sponsoring this program, and they want to see outcomes, and trying to kind of beat your head up against the wall, trying to like now we gotta like almost solve homelessness, which was which was very different. So I realized very quickly I'm not a great social worker. I'm good at just like handing out sandwiches and like getting to know people's stories and stuff like that, but I'm not a great like formal social worker. But what I realized was like those times where I would get really kind of just not frustrated, but just kind of start to lose energy, because you just feel like, man, like this is hard.
Yeah.
This is hard. They come with, like, when you're trying to actually solve the physical problems, they come with such wealth of problems, and it would get kind of deep discouraging is the word I'm looking for. But when I would hear their stories, I remember sitting across from a gentleman, and he just started telling me about, like, he played the trumpet growing up, and he's got a sister, and stuff that he liked as a kid, and his parents and stuff like that. And when you start to realize that the person sitting in front of you is no longer an issue to solve, but now they're like a real person, I just noticed that would just catapult me into action. And so that's kind of like, and I would just want to do anything I could to help that person, because all of a sudden they become human. And so I think that really kind of sparked my love for storytelling and content creation, because I was really more interested in telling their stories and telling the story of the program that was happening and stuff like that. So eventually they said, you should go do that. Also known as being fired.
Yeah.
And that's how I sort of was stumbled into a video career. But yeah, I mean, it's just when you realize the humanity in another person, it just connects you emotionally in a way that, like, just information and the logical kind of communication can't.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. My uncle, actually, he has he has schizophrenia, and so he's been on the streets for on and off for like most of his life, and most of his adult life, I should say. And it's funny, like he's growing up. This was actually in Hawaii. I was born and raised in Hawaii, and there's actually a pretty like thriving homeless community in Hawaii. Way back when the federal government had a program where they buy people like a one-way ticket to Hawaii, because it's it's warm, and the climate's nice year round. So anyways, the state, it's been a huge like challenge for the state, quite frankly. But there are a lot of homeless people in Hawaii. Anyways, so I remember, like, at times when we were growing up, my parents, if we saw him at the bus stop or the McDonald's, we could go and, like, we'd buy him like a Happy Meal or whatever from McDonald's, and we'd chat with him. And anyways, I remember talking to some of his friends at one point, and just to your point, being so moved by how vulnerable they were, and actually, quite frankly, just how great they were at telling stories, right, about like their lives, and just they just volunteer a lot of information. And obviously there's a lot going on there, but one of the things that I wonder is perhaps it's because you're at a place, you're in a context where you're just so freaking vulnerable that you really have nothing to lose but be like radically yourself, right? And I feel
Yeah.
like that is the best storytelling. Like when you're talking to somebody who is so unapologetically who they are, regardless of what they think and what you think about what they think, it's interesting, it's entertaining,
Hmm.
it's thought provoking, right? So I wonder if there's this element of great storytelling that really has to do with finding a context where people are so unbelievably vulnerable. And like vulnerable has all these like layered connotations, some of which aren't always so great. But I wonder if really that is the ideal circumstance that somebody needs to be in to truly get something remarkable.
Yeah, vulnerability is something I talk a lot about on the podcast, and then we get into sort of like Brene Brown quotes,
Mm.
stuff like that. But it really is. It is a key tenet of storytelling is vulnerability, and that vulnerability really unlocks, like it brings guards down. Like when that's the vulnerability that says this person is another human, and now we're connecting human to human rather than business to business or business to customer
Yeah.
or whatever that is. And I read somewhere that like I mean I don't know what the statistic is, but like when a customer or whatever sees you being vulnerable or sees a piece of content where the person is being vulnerable, it's like a dramatic increase in engagement and conversion
Yeah.
rates, because now they have this emotional bond that they wouldn't have had if you were just pitching services to them.
Yeah.
And so that's why storytelling is just something that I really um, promote a lot, and not in the same way. I think storytelling gets really confused. It's such a buzzword, and so it gets
Yeah.
confused with just marketing, like
Yeah.
with just saying things. Like people think that, oh, I said this thing and then I used some fancy words, so I told a story.
Hmm.
It's like, well, not necessarily. There's like actual scientific things that go into storytelling, vulnerability being one of those things that kind of unlock that brain chemistry.
Well, it happened again. Prospect Paul is excited about attending your institution, but is getting consistently confused by all of the information and tasks he needs to complete to enroll, creating friction and, even worse, possible melt. You knew this would happen again, which is why you've been flagging the need for a come to Jesus meeting with leadership from marketing, admissions, and IT to audit the digital experience for prospective students. Here's the problem. You're not going to convince Mark from marketing to let go of his marketing automation software. Adriana from admissions just got set up with her new CRM, and Isabel from IT is still working through ticket requests from last Christmas. But what if you could come to the table with a solution that didn't require anyone to let go of their software, while at the same time ensuring a frictionless experience for prospects and current students alike? Well, my friend, guess what? Today is your lucky day. Meet Pathify, an innovative higher ed engagement hub that puts students at the center of their college journey. Pathify sits at the center of your school's digital ecosystem, becoming the single user experience interface tying together all systems, content, and communications. Their engagement hub elevates the information that matters most and pushes systems like your SIS behind the scenes where they belong, which makes it simpler for students to discover and engage with the opportunities your institution provides at every step of their higher ed journey, from prospect all the way through to alumni. What's even better is that Pathify has a mobile experience that provides 100% parity with the responsive web app, so your campus app is always in sync. Pathify is a platform that every stakeholder on campus, from marketing to admissions to student affairs to IT, etc., can get equally excited about. You can learn more about how Pathify is uniting strategic units across campus and bettering the entire student experience by visiting pathify.com. And be sure to tell them that Zach from the Enrollify podcast sent you their way. Again, that's pathify.com. And be sure to mention that you heard about them on the Enrollify podcast. All right, folks, back to the show. What do you think? Because there are folks who are listening to this conversation probably thinking to themselves, of course, like everyone talks about why vulnerability is important and why it's this kind of key ingredient to accessing quality story. What are sort of the circumstances that you think, like, what is necessary in order to harness this from students in a way that's obviously still sort of like respectful and not exploitive, like which can certainly happen. Like, how do you think folks can do a better job at facilitating environments for the purpose of capturing story that promote and inspire vulnerability?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to just getting to know people. And so when I think when colleges and universities go to do storytelling, most of them that I've talked to don't have a bank of stories,
Yeah.
in their back pocket. So we start working with them, and they go, okay, now we got to go find stories. And so when you do that, and you say, hey, I want stories, send us stories. Typically, the ones that come back are what people would assume the marketing team wants, which
Yeah.
is like, I liked the school, 5 stars,
Yeah. Yeah.
had a great experience, always wanted to be an engineer, went to school for engineering, and now I'm an engineer,
Mm,
that kind of thing. But when you really listen, and when you really start to ask deeper questions of students and get into contexts where you're getting to know students, in a different way than just a survey, or just like, some vague kind of like, hey, send us your story. All of a sudden you start as a storyteller to uncover the stories yourself through just genuinely connecting with people. And so
mm,
I like, one of the things that I kind of recommend is market research and storytelling go hand in hand. And when you're actually talking to a student or an alumni and hearing about their experience with the school, and getting kind of that quantitative feedback, that's also a great opportunity to be like, hey, where are you coming from, and why does
yeah.
that matter to you, or like, what's a challenge that you've overcome in your life. And so I think it really comes down to just asking better questions.
Hmm.
That's one of the things that, like, I just think is really important, is finding ways to, like, get someone's guard to come down and start to be vulnerable with you, so that you can start to absorb, like, oh, there is a compelling story here
Yeah.
that wouldn't have come out if we were just asking them, like, rate the school on a scale of 1 to 10, or like,
Yeah.
send us your story. They might not even know they have a story. So if you're just like, send us your story, they might just be like, I don't have one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you really start digging,
I
there's stories everywhere, and you won't know that unless you're really starting to kind of talk to people and ask better questions.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple things come to mind there. One is just around also this, I think this key ingredient, which I think is layered into what you're saying here is time, right? Like you need time to get to know somebody before you're willing to share in a meaningful fashion. And even if you're like an open book, even if you're maybe more extroverted, you like talking to people, you like talking about yourself, even if all those things are true, oftentimes, right, there is still like this barrier that exists between, the face that Zach puts on when he's, podcasting or networking versus, Zach after 5 p.m. or whatever it is, right? Like both are still Zach. There's still aspects of who I am. But if you want more detail on, Zach after 5 p.m., like you're only going to get that with time, right? Meaning it's going to take some level of like mutual commitment and interest with each other, the interviewer and the interviewee, before I'm willing to go there, which is actually why I think like long form podcasts are super interesting, right? You think about like the Joe Rogan show, for instance, right? And just what he's able to do in like 3 hours with somebody. And you
Yeah.
listen to like the first 20 minutes versus like the last 20 minutes of any conversation, regardless of what you think of Joe, like, and you can see this total change in how people are and how they're communicating, right? And it's like you've gone from this, you've transitioned from I'm in the hot seat, I'm being interrogated, to like, okay, we are two buddies, having a beer and talking about what's
Right.
really going on in life, right? And I feel like so much of the time when it comes to creating this content in the context of higher ed, it's like, all right, we're going to schedule my interview with John from 9 o'clock to 9:30 on this day. And like in 30 minutes, I'm trying to get you to be vulnerable with me and share something super interesting that I can use for a 3 to 4 minute like program overview video. Like, and that is so like unhuman. Like that is just like it's impossible to get anything meaningful in 30 minutes, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any specific reactions to kind of like the time component and the time element here.
Yeah, I mean, building a rapport is huge, and that's something that, because I found my business is a video production company. We work with colleges on their video storytelling. So one of the components of the things that we really pay attention to is when we're like the school will hand off. We try to take a lot of the coordinating and direct, kind of tedious coordinating and stuff with the students to get them to the shoot on the same day, whatever.
Yeah.
And in that process is building rapport with the student or the alumni. And it's really important for us to do a pre-interview. And that's where we like the cameras aren't rolling.
Yeah.
We're just talking over Zoom and we can kind of get to know them. And it's amazing. I don't think there's been a time where I ever regretted doing a pre-interview.
Yeah.
Like just getting to know you. From what the school will tell us about this particular student is usually about 40% of the meat that's there. And because they're, like you said, that they have no reason really yet to be like super vulnerable with the school. The school is just kind of like, you got a story like, oh, this person would be a great candidate. Here you go, John. And so I think it really comes down to building rapport, and that's a huge part of what we do. We don't go into an interview with a student or faculty or anyone without having talked to them first in a really low key setting and just shooting the breeze. Stuff comes out all the time that you wouldn't otherwise know. My background in video production is I kind of cut my teeth in weddings. And as most videographers, I feel like do. But one of the things that we started implementing because we were very focused on storytelling and not in the typical, like every wedding videographer filmmaker says they're a storyteller, and then you look at their work and it's just like a music video, and that's like, okay, maybe it's a visual story, but like we really wanted to dive deeper into like the emotion of the day and the backstories of the couple. So one of the things we started doing was we would pre-interview the toast givers, because they're the ones that are bringing a lot of the dialogue, to the day, where they're telling stories and they're talking and stuff like that. And we would try to get to know the bride and the groom through their toast givers a little bit. And it was interesting how much just a simple 10-minute conversation with a maid of honor or something completely changed the way that we filmed that day. We picked up on things that we would have never picked up on, and you're able to just get a much more intimate storytelling. So I really think it just does come down to, at the very least, you're going to have a transactional interview with someone coming up on video or whatever. At least take 15 minutes to just build some rapport with them ahead of time, and calm any sort of worries, because that person's coming into that and they've built it up a lot in their minds. And they're probably, can't count how many times I've interviewed people who had been practicing in the mirror the night before.
Yeah.
And that's just a symptom of like, my guard is up.
Yeah.
I want to perform. Like it really takes a skill to get somebody to let their guard down. And that's where you really get into the meat, of a conversation. We did this previous production company I worked at. We were hired by a woman who was a horse show jumper.
Okay.
And she
show jumper
has a lot of money.
Okay.
She's an heir of the Hearst Corporation.
Oh wow. Okay.
And so she flew us out to California, where she was competing, and she goes, well, I just want to do a story, like 4-minute story on my horses, so why don't you come out for a week, meet the horses, film some stuff, and we'll just see what happens. So that ended up turning into like a full-fledged documentary on the sport of show jumping that's been screened all over the world because of primarily one interview with this gold medal Olympian in show jumping. and we were just talking to him about the sport and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden we asked him about just, hey, like recount for us the story behind winning the gold medal. And he just starts crying.
Wow.
And like, it becomes this really vulnerable moment. And he's like this really macho guy,
Wow.
where
Wow.
he's just like, he's like crying. And it was just like this huge moment. And it was that moment where like, okay, there's more of a story here than just horses,
Yeah.
and so it's really in trying to get to those moments of vulnerability that completely transform a piece of content.
Yeah. That's so well said. And it reminds me of some of sort of like the greatest storytellers and documentarians and whatnot. And um some of the things that that I've read, right, is that you think about like Walter Isaacson for example, right, and how he approaches his books and his biographies. And one of the things that I've heard him quoted in an interview saying is like, I try my best to go in with like no idea of how the story is going to come together, right? Versus like, I feel like most of us approach content with like, even we were just talking before we went live with in this interview of, hey, most of the time when I'm doing interviews or you're being interviewed or you do your interviews, you send your interviewee sort of like a rough frame for, hey, this is what we're going to talk about, and here are some questions that I'd like you to think about. And like, we're prepping the individual, and it's mostly a
Mhm.
selfish thing, quite frankly. It's so that like the content that I'm producing on my platform is good, right? Like, that's ultimately why we want to prepare our subjects, right? Same thing
Yeah.
goes for folks working in higher ed marketing. You want to find the right students that are going to frame the university in the best possible light so that your team looks good, so that the president's happy, so the board's happy, etc. Right? That's human nature, quite frankly, right? But
Yeah.
some of the best creators, right? Like, they understand that if you do that too often, or if you're too prescriptive about it, like the content, even if it's high quality, like if it comes out and it's well produced, it's lacking any sort of like meaningful, interesting substance, and it quite frankly ends up just sounding like the institution down the street story, right?
Mhm.
Because you went in with this preconceived notion of how the conversation was going to go or how it should go, right? You worked hard on these questions. You specifically asked these questions to this particular student because in the pre-interview that they mentioned something about X, Y, or Z. And this isn't to say that no preparation is needed for these things. In fact, people like, Walter Isaacson, for example, right? He's spent his entire like life preparing for these conversations, right? In just his
Yeah.
work. So there is something to be said for that. But I often find too, in when I conduct my own interviews, that if I'm too formulaic up front, even if the content comes out good, it's usually rather boring. Right? Like,
Mhm.
it's not nearly as interesting. Whereas if I'm talking to you, John, and you say something that's sort of off topic, not really relevant to the core topic we had agreed to, but if I was like intrigued, like if there's like a little light bulb that went off in my head and I chose not to pursue that off ramp, like
Mhm.
9 times out of 10, I'm making a huge mistake. And yeah, I feel like that just takes practice. So, like, what from your work, where have you noticed, or like, what are some signals that people could look for when they're either conducting their own interviews or they're working with a partner like you to interview their students? Where might be an opportunity to leave the script behind or press in deeper, or ask 3 more follow-up questions because the student reacted this particular way to this topic? Like, are there things that we can look for in order to, quite frankly, encourage us to drop the script and just kind of press into the moment? And if so, what are those things?
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much what to look for, but I would say a few techniques that I employ, that I really have gotten a lot of value out of is uh, starting the interview on a foot that's not about the topic.
Hmm.
So in my podcast, a few months ago, I started implementing asking each guest, tell me, like, my first question after I introduce them is, tell me something that people would be surprised to know about you.
Yeah.
And that's been my favorite question
Hmm.
because people have some great answers that just put everyone at ease. Had a guest on that went to high school with Brad Pitt, he doesn't even remember, but Brad Pitt signed his yearbook, and for what he wrote in the yearbook, he assumes they were in gym class together. So he's like, I like to tell people I've showered with Brad Pitt.
I think I also
and
heard
it's
you had
stuff like that, and then it's my guest last week, Liz Gross from Campus Sonar, talked about how it's just like a serial gardener, and her backyard is like a farm, and I'm like, that's great, because like I love that stuff too. I love, gardening, growing things, making things myself, figuring things out. So that's just always has been a great way for us to get off on a different foot and kind of put everything at ease. Another thing, kind of midway through the interview or sprinkled throughout, I like to ask like, how did you feel about that? Like, how did that make you feel? We want to ask questions that get people into their emotions and that draw people towards vulnerability. Because when you just ask, well, what happened? They're giving you the play-by-play. I do a lot of human trafficking survivor stories with the organization. I'm actually wearing their t-shirt today, the Joseph Project.
Oh, wow.
And they do pro bono legal services for human trafficking survivors, because when people are trafficked, they pick up all these charges that they wouldn't have gotten on their record had they not been victimized. And so they connect them with pro bono lawyers to get their records expunged. Wow. Super cool organization. But in those, there's so much play-by-play in those interviews of like, I met this guy, this is what happened, and this is how he abused me, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then it's really those moments where I'm like, how did that make you feel? Or that must have been terrifying. Where then they go, yeah, it was. And you kind of just see this like this point, you see this body language of like the vulnerability start to come out. Where it's like they've told this story a million times. But it's like, man, someone just validating that must have been terrifying. All of a sudden it opens up this door to vulnerable responses, from that. So and that's not, so, but like, when you validate someone's feelings, and and even if we're sitting with a student or alumni and they're just talking about like an aspiration that they were pursuing, whatever, it might not be as dramatic as I'm sure it's probably not as dramatic as human trafficking. But they're maybe they had a barrier to overcome. Maybe they were a first generation college student or something like that, and they didn't know English, it wasn't their first language or whatever. It's just, man, that must have been really hard. Or like, man, how'd you feel about that? What did you think about? Like, what kept you up at night? And then also just kind of validating and sort of saying like, that must have felt like blank, or man, you must have been really proud of yourself, or something like that. And those responses tend to be the vulnerable ones. The other one is, I think most videographers use and employ this one, is that at the end of the interview, some of the best responses have come from just being like, what else? And just and just leaving it there. In my previous production company that I worked for, I was a creative director there, and we did a lot of documentary stuff. One of our clients was this food service company. They do like all the food service for like GM and stuff like that, like all the high-end food. Their CEO, we've filmed him a number of times, and every time he doesn't want to be on camera. He said, I'm not the important one. I don't have anything great to say. You interviewed these other guys, and we're like, no, Jim, like, you got something to say. And we would do this whole interview, and he would be kind of, rehearsed, whatever. It would be great. But then we would go, Jim, what else? Like, what else didn't we ask you? And he'd be like, I think that's about it. But you know what? Blah, 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 blah. And he would say the most amazing thing that would be the anchor for the entire video right there. Every time. It was like, we would all, the crew, and we became good friends with the client. We would all like ask that question, and we would just look at each other like, yep, there it is.
But that, like, and I think that speaks to like the whole like timing and space, right? And really, quite frankly, like the patience of, hey, if you want something like great, it's very rare that you can get anything great quickly, right? It usually takes
Yeah.
a little bit of time, and the same thing goes for storytelling. And I think that oftentimes we're so rushed, or we're so, especially higher ed marketers who have a lot on their plate. This is just the next project, right? To kind of like get through one of like 17 things that they're juggling right now. And I think as video as just a medium becomes increasingly more important, quite frankly, becomes like the primary medium, it already is, in which storytelling takes place. It's only going to be amplified even more in the years to come. All the more need, quite frankly, to make sure that you have systems and processes and structure in place that allow for space and allow for time. And one of the things that I'd be curious if you've seen some good examples of this, John, or not, but I keep waiting for like the almost like the reality TV show sort of approach for student stories, right? Of like, hey, what does it actually look like to follow a few students throughout their entire 4 years at your respective college or university, and then how do you package that into fantastic? You have to wait 4 years, right? But then like how do you take that? You don't even have to wait 4 years. You could release content like as they're living out their experience. But then on the back end, how do you take all of that and package it and release it, and like, hey, meet John, this is who John was, these are literally John's words, these are the things that he's thinking about and working through in his freshman year of college versus meeting sophomore John versus junior John, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Are there examples out there that come to mind of schools that are doing this sort of work well? And if not, why do you think that that's the case?
Well, Zach, you just gave me an incredible idea. I'm like, what if a school had a YouTube channel just for one student?
Yeah, exactly.
And then, they had several of these, and you could follow a student that was in the program that you're interested in, and you could subscribe to their journey. That's a freaking amazing idea.
Yeah. And I mean, that needs to happen. Like there's no reason that shouldn't happen. Except for fear of like, oh, well, what if the program's not, what if their experience with the program isn't so great? But hey, people like authentic content, and if that's actually true, then maybe there's something wrong with your program, and not necessarily something wrong with the student's experience of it.
For sure. If I'm actually very skeptical of any product that has 100% positive reviews, because it's just not realistic. Somebody has to have hit a hiccup there. It's just not, and I just assume that I don't trust you. I just assume you're feeding me what I want to hear. But yeah, how do you package that? That's one idea. Have a whole account dedicated to someone's journey, and how you incentivize that person to document their journey, or let a video crew follow them around. That might be kind of intense for 4 years to have, a videographer following them around. But, Gary Vee does it.
Yeah, exactly. And Gary Vee, might have a budget that's a little bit different than most of our listeners. But that said, right, like schools do spend a lot of money on marketing stuff. It's like, what does it look like to find, to basically say, hey, we're going to commit, some amount of significant dollars to this over the next 4 years, and we're just going to see what happens. Like, I guarantee, right, especially if you can make, I mean, think about like think about Love Is Blind, right? Have you watched Love Is Blind?
I am obsessed with that show. I'm glad you asked.
Great.
We could do a whole other podcast episode on that, and I'm ready to go right now.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I am like my wife's a big fan of it, and I like watch episodes. I've watched a couple seasons with her. I am watching the most recent season with her, but I'm behind, so don't tell me if you finish the season. But the point being, like, and this is not new. Their formula is not new at all. But what's different about reality TV today than a decade ago, right, is that you can kind of follow the story in real time on Instagram, right? Like, my wife like goes and she like follows all these accounts, like she knows what people are saying about so and so in real time as the show's like playing out. So like you take one series on Netflix, right, and it's 8 or 10, 12 episodes, however long the actual like season is. But and that's 12 long form pieces of content. But then the amount of like secondary, tertiary, and just like bite-sized pieces of content that get created about the show and about like whose team are you on, and all of this is in real time. I mean, it's incredible. It's why it's one of Netflix's like highest grossing products is because of that, right? And you think, how this is not a hard, like from a production standpoint, like this doesn't look that hard, right? It's not a well polished documentary,
Right.
and you just leave. I always leave wondering, like, wow, like why isn't this in high? Like if this was just higher ed, like if somebody did stuff like this, hopefully in a little bit more of a tasteful fashion, it's less romantic focused and more just
Sure.
student experience focused, but. That's like $1 billion idea. Like, why aren't people doing that? Anyways, sorry, I'll get off my
I bet that would
soapbox.
be, if you had a romantic
Oh,
component
even
to
better.
that account, that would seriously amplify the content. I think I would say any school, please hire me to do this because this sounds amazing. But like, people get so invested in who's dating who. And I think
Yeah.
that could be such a good side story, like underpinning story of like, people are like finding themselves and finding these important relationships in their life in college. And it's really just addressing this idea of, belonging and, I don't know, but just that stage of life, and people get so invested. It's amazing what people get invested in. But you're like, if you're watching Love is Blind, you're like on one team or another, and
Yeah.
everyone's trying to figure out who's the villain and what's going to happen. And I posted on my Instagram stories yesterday. I was like, it's Love is Blind Reels season, and I'm here for it, because it's like
It is.
all the parody stuff comes out, and it's so funny.
Yeah.
But like people eat that stuff up because the parodies are exactly communicating what you're thinking watching this trashy show, but you get so opinionated.
Yeah.
And like my wife and I have like all these strong opinions about people that we know only from the edited version of themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, but like that's a thing that's like, I saw I think it was NYU, maybe. It was this girl that I didn't watch any of her other stuff, but she had like this 12-minute video of her documenting her first day of school at, I think it was NYU. And it was just selfie stuff of like, hey, I'm walking to class, or hey, I'm in class and doing this lecture, I'm taking notes, whatever. And it was actually really interesting to watch her journey and just see the normal stuff that she was doing. But then she actually connected that to like her brand, which she was linking affiliate links to every outfit that she was wearing in the YouTube description. And I just thought, that is brilliant. That's marrying what somebody cares about, that would be an incentive for them to create content for you, with what the school cares about. But yeah, that's like finding ways to be unscripted, to be vulnerable, to talk about things that might make the communications PR team squirm a little bit. I think that's all very smart marketing. Is if you can get people invested in other people, that's going to reflect on your brand. And I think that's really the linchpin here, or whatever, with storytelling, is how we get it wrong is we think about storytelling as telling the story of our brand, which nobody cares about, to be quite honest. Because people aren't connecting to a brand, and it's like, if you look on I always like to look at packaging on like a water bottle packaging, or coconut water, whatever it is, and where it says like, oh, here's our story, and then you read it and it's like water from a glacier, and it was filtered through whatever, and it's just flowery information. And you get done reading that, I'm like, if I said to somebody, hey, Zach, I want to tell you a story, it's water from a glacier, it's blah blah blah, it's blah blah blah, like here's all the features, you'd be like, where's the story?
Where's
the student, or where's the human element in that? So it's like, that is really, storytelling is a very basic thing. I think we overcomplicate it, but it's sort of like, when you're telling a story, if you could take what you said and say to someone at a party, let me tell you a story. And if it would be awkward for you to tell that story, then you're probably focusing too much on the brand. So
That's incredibly well said. I think that framing actually really, really helps, right? Like if you're trying to discern whether or not you're collecting information, right, and or harnessing like a real story, I think asking yourself that very question is super helpful. Like if you were to articulate this to somebody that you had just met at a party after saying, "Let me tell you a story," would it sound like a feature set, or would it sound like something actually compelling? And I think
yeah,
that's a wonderful like litmus test, right? Of like whether or not you are doing the right work. Um, I do want to ask, as you think about like storytelling, and you think specifically about the vehicles, right? The mediums in which stories are most often told today, which is through through Instagram, through YouTube, right? As creators leverage these platforms in really kind of cool, interesting, amazing ways right now. Where do you see the opportunity for schools to latch on to or partner with creators? Because one of the things I've talked about several times on this podcast is like higher ed has access to a plethora of like people that are living the experience of their brand on a day-to-day basis, right? And
hmm
many of those people have, and a growing number of them have Instagram accounts and YouTube accounts, and they care about content. They care about creating content. They might have a niche following that has, at face value, nothing to really do with your institution, but they do have an audience, right? Like how do institutions do a better job at partnering with their students to not just tell their stories on their platforms, but to help
hmm
empower students to tell the institution's, story on their
yeah.
respective platforms. Like what does that look like in over the next few years from your vantage point?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a code that I've been trying to crack probably for for the last year, because what my company does is very, more like the high end sort of
Yeah.
kind of commercial level documentary type stuff. Um, but there's so much value in this user generated content. And I've talked to so many schools who have done varying levels of incentives, and ways of getting people to talk about the school on their channels. There's all kind of brand ambassador programs, incentive hiring student interns to create content, um, paying, monetarily incentivizing students to create content.
Yeah.
And I don't know that anyone's really cracked that code yet, but
Yeah.
there is such an opportunity. What goes through my mind, as we were just talking about this, following somebody on a channel through their journey at college, like what if you created a scholarship around that, a
Yeah.
content creation scholarship? And
Yeah.
it's like, let's just say you were just going to go full throttle and like, we're going to give you a full ride. If you're an influencer already and you're already creating great content, we're going to give you a full ride to this school to come document your journey here.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that might, that's a lever that you can pull. But it really comes down to, I think it's a tough road to just constantly be pestering the whole student body to be like, oh, please create content and tag us. Like,
Yeah.
they don't care. Like
Yeah.
they'll do what they want to,
Yeah. Yeah.
but like if you can rope somebody into an agreement, and ideally that's someone that's already having influence and already experimenting with new ways of creating and things, because your student creators are going to have spins on things and create pieces of content that you would never think to do it that way,
Yeah.
and the way that they would do it is going to be so much more effective than what the
Yeah.
marketing team assumes people want to see. So I think it's something that I think about a lot, is like, how do we, from a video company perspective, how do I help my clients not only harness the power of this high quality video content, but also how do we get that working in tandem with user generated content?
Yeah.
I think there's a definite like opportunity for, like, what I see a lot of on TikTok or Reels. If you're a millennial, you're just watching TikTok reruns on
Yeah. On Reels.
on Reels for the most part. I saw a meme that was like, I watch TikTok on Reels like a real adult or something like that. But it's like, what I gravitate towards is following somebody's journey, and I get fed a lot because I do a lot of I'm interested in like passive income streams and side hustle type stuff. So I get fed a lot of that entrepreneurial
Yeah.
side hustle stuff. And some people that show up in my feed are like, follow me on my journey to hit my first like 6-figure month or
Yeah.
whatever it is. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that is so interesting.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's like I would love to do what she's doing, and I'm so curious to see what she's trying. And there's so much of that where it's just like, follow me on this journey. And that's kind of where I've been with my podcast, and then with the subsequent newsletter that comes out. I kind of try to take that approach of like, I'm I'm with you in the
Yeah.
higher ed marketing, thing, but I'm also a business owner that's also trying to market my business in a similar way. So
Yeah.
come with me on this journey of like using AI to create a blog post from a podcast episode, or
Yeah.
like whatever it is. And I just think that tends to be the most popular content that I put out, is in the newsletter, the most clicked on stuff, where it's just like, hey, I learned this thing, follow
Yeah.
me as I'm trying to do this, and maybe you can put it to use in your higher ed context. But I think that's an opportunity for a school, is to I think when you think about like, oh, how do we get a student creator to just, if you just say like create content, like
Yeah.
that's overwhelming.
It's so
But
abstract.
we
Yeah.
can really simplify it to be like a very successful TikTok channel can be, you just do this one simple thing every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know and it might just be like, what did I do today to earn passive income, and how much did I earn?
Yeah.
That might be it. It's I'm blanking on, it might just be dancing. You just,
You're learning salsa.
boyfriend girlfriend get together, just dance.
Yeah.
You do the latest dance trend in your pajamas. There's one couple that does that.
Yeah.
It's just like, come up with something that you can repeat, and that gives students a very easy structure that can be replicated, that's not overwhelming. And then you can apply that across the board on like TikTok shorts, reels,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, great ideas, and just to piggyback off it with a couple things. One, to your point about folks liking to follow people along a journey, I think what's really interesting about that is it's everyone's skeptical of like the talking head that's like, here's how I made $5 million last year. We're working 5 hours a week or something like that. Like there are all
Right.
these like gurus that have quote unquote made it, and half the time you're like, are you really like as successful as you say you are? Because if you are,
Yeah.
why are you creating this content? It's dumb, right? Go enjoy your money, right? So that's
Mhm.
one perspective, and another perspective is just like, okay, maybe they have done it, but if they have done it, and it just doesn't make sense. Like, it seems too crazy for me to believe. But right, if somebody's inviting me to follow them on a journey to make $10,000 or $100,000 in a month, and they haven't done it yet, that is what's intriguing, right? Because it's like,
Absolutely.
hey, like you are putting yourself out there. You're like jumping into the arena, right? You are exposing yourself to fail, quite frankly. So maybe it's the sick part of me that's like wondering if you will fail, right? But the better part of me, I think, is like wanting you to win and wanting to learn from you along the way. But that is so much more interesting than listening to somebody who's already done it, right? So I think
Absolutely.
that there's a certain element there. And the second thing that I would say is, like, we're talking a lot about like, hey, how do you help your students? How do you help inspire your student body to create content for you? Whether through paid means, through just inspiring them, making it super simple. Hey, follow this particular format. Post on TikTok. We'll select one person every day to get $50 lunch credit to the dining hall, or whatever it is. Like, you could do something like that. But you could also, just to make this a hell of a lot easier for folks, you could just decide like, hey, we want to create an insane amount of Instagrammable moments at our college or university, right? Like, our goal as a marketing team over the next year, we just want to create moments on campus that are so cool and so different and so unique that everyone just wants to post about it on Instagram and TikTok. Like, that could be a strategy that saves you from having to spend a lot of time worrying about or trying to get students to become creators for you. Instead, just give them something so exceptional or such a ridiculous experience that they can't help but create content about that experience, right? So like
Mhm.
that's another thing to think about. Like, what if you and your marketing team walked around campus and everyone had to come up with 10 ideas of things that we could do over the next semester to make something Instagrammable? Like,
Yeah.
that would be such a fun creative exercise. And I don't know, like Allison Tercio from Siena College has done something like this, and it's worked really, really well for her team. And it's just something that is seemingly easy. I should say it's simple, and maybe not easy, but these are simple things that, you know, if you're not in a position to go hire a bunch of creators overnight, think about how do I create a ton of Instagrammable moments.
Yeah, Allison does a great job of building community offline
Yeah.
as well as online. And I think that's a really important thing where like social media content exists online, but it's seeded. It's the catalyst for the content is offline.
Yeah.
So you need it's very important to kind of bridge the gap between this digital relationship that you have with someone and like seeing them in real life and experiencing something together. So yeah, creating fun events that are worth Instagramming or whatever. But like also there's something really powerful in people being able to follow a character
Yeah.
through an experience.
Yeah.
So like one of the things, so we're getting ready, there's a business school here in Michigan that we work with called Cleary University. And we're getting ready to do like a subscription of like hype videos. Over the course of the next year, we're doing hype videos of all 17 of their sports because the big athletics
Yeah.
component.
Yeah.
And I'm working through this creative direction yesterday, and I'm like, we need to focus in on a few athletes per team because
Yeah.
it just gives someone to like anchor themselves to watch them warming up, seeing hearing from them, hearing their voice, seeing if do they win, do they lose, what failures did they run into, things like that. And that's such a good just thing to remember with content creation is give somebody a human to latch onto, because that's the beauty of anything that's binge worthy. That's the only reason people keep coming back to Love is Blind to
Yeah.
watch that, is because they are hooked on certain people. They love to hate the person that's the villain.
Yeah.
They are rooting for the person that's like just very sweet and innocent, and you want the best for them. And you can and if you look at there's this whole TikTok phenomenon of sororities, and the new process of recruiting sorority members, it's like called rush talk.
Yeah.
Hashtag rush talk, if you search that hashtag, and it's sorority girls doing these elaborate dances and this dog and pony show of content and building a following in order to be accepted into a sorority. But not only is it about that, it's brands are making major deals with these sorority hopefuls, and these girls are launching major career like influencer careers based on this, and people are actually watching and rooting for their favorites and like following this journey as they would a reality TV show.
Yeah.
And that's so interesting to me because I just don't care. I don't know why people would care about that, but people do care.
Yeah.
And the beauty and the science of that is you're giving people a character to latch onto. So what would it look like to create an event, but then take a core group of 3 or 4 individuals to commit to creating content and bringing people on a journey that's more than just like, oh, here's a picture of this
Yeah.
fun social dance that we did, but maybe it's like, hey, let's take people a month ahead of time, and they got to find a date to
Yeah.
this dance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make it interesting. It's like, how are they going to navigate that?
Ah.
And then it just paints the dance in a much stronger light, because it's like now you're seeing the event, but you've got such an emotional attachment to what it took to get there for
Yeah.
certain people, and everyone can relate to that. Like, I want to date people, but I don't know where to meet people at anymore,
Yeah.
except for online,
Yeah.
and the online dating I don't know, it's been a long time since I completely surpassed the online day. I got married before that whole thing took off, but I hear it's just very volatile.
Yeah.
So the idea of, watching someone go through that, trying to find, I don't know, a date or something like that. To me, that's interesting. Maybe I'm just really in like Love is Blind mode, and I'm just like, everything should be a dating show. I think all colleges should have their own version of a dating show.
Oh, dude, this has been a super awesome conversation, John. I really appreciate your time, and it's been fun to riff on these ideas. I really do hope folks listening in take these ideas and run with a couple of them, and then if you do, like, let us know. Like, we want to see you create your own Love is Blind at your college or university, right? We want you to think critically about how to create Instagrammable moments and tell us about them. So, John, if folks do want some help, and if they're listening to these ideas, they love these ideas, but they know that they don't have the internal staffing to make this happen, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you and to learn a little bit more about your team and your respective services?
Yeah, my company is called Unveiled. It's spelled Unveild, and we're at unveiled.tv. Our biggest thing that we work with schools on is a subscription offering, a storytelling subscription. So it's a monthly, we batch shoot a year's worth of content, and then we drip out storytelling content each month. So it kind of automates the process of this content creation and creating meaningful, vulnerable content. So you can learn about that on the website. Also, my podcast is called Higher Ed Storytelling University, and then I have a weekly newsletter that comes out. So you can sign up at unveiled.tv/newsletter. I'm also on LinkedIn if you want to just chat.
Wonderful. And we will have links to John's website, his LinkedIn profile, and his podcast, which I highly recommend that you guys listen to as well. Several of the folks we've had on this show have been on that show, but they also have just a plethora of great stories. One of the things I learned actually in your interview with Eric Stoller is that he had a dinner with Taylor Swift unexpectedly. That was like his fun fact, which was a real fun fact. So yeah, can't recommend the show enough. John, thank you so much for your time, man. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great to be here.
Hey y'all, Zach here from Enrollify. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Enrollify podcast. If you liked this episode, do us a huge favor and hit that follow and subscribe button below. Furthermore, if you've got just 2 minutes to spare, we would greatly appreciate you leaving a rating and a review of this show on Apple Podcasts. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. But Enrollify is far more than just a podcast network. Enrollify is where higher ed comes to learn new marketing skills, discover new products and services, and find their next job. We're a growing, learning community of 4,000 members, and we'd love to welcome you into the fold. You can access our free blog articles, newsletters, e-courses, and more, or purchase our master course on how to market a university with Terry Flannery at Enrollify.org. We look forward to meeting you soon and welcoming you into the community. Again, you can subscribe for free at Enrollify.org.